Somewhere around 70,000 years ago, the entire human species nearly went extinct, and honestly, we kind of walked right into it. Not walked into it like a dramatic metaphor. I mean that literally. A small group of humans looked at the only continent their species had ever known, said, "Yeah, this'll be fine," and wandered off into completely unknown territory with zero maps, zero Google reviews, and zero idea whether the next valley had food, water, or something with teeth that considered them a snack. This is the story of how your entire existence hinges on a group of people who were, frankly, kind of winging it. Let's set the scene. For most of human history, basically everyone lived in Africa. Not because humans were picky, because leaving was insanely hard. You've got deserts the size of countries, oceans with no boats to cross them, and an entire planet that had absolutely no interest in making things easy for a soft, slow, clawless primate whose best defense mechanism was throw a rock and hope. And yet, at some point, a small band of humans said, "Forget it. We're doing this anyway." Paleoanthropologist Chris Stringer, one of the leading researchers on human migration, has described this period as involving multiple waves of humans leaving Africa, some of which fizzled out entirely, dead ends that simply didn't make it. So picture that for a second. This wasn't humanity's one shot that worked perfectly on the first try. This was more like humanity's most chaotic group project, with several earlier attempts that just didn't turn in the assignment. Entire branches of the family tree that tried to leave and got erased from history because the desert said no. Think about how embarrassing that is, cosmically speaking. Somewhere out there, tens of thousands of years before the group that actually made it, other humans packed up, left Africa, probably felt very proud of themselves, and then just vanished from the fossil record. No sequel, no highlight reel, just a quiet fade out somewhere in the Levant or the Arabian Peninsula, while the rest of humanity stayed home completely unaware that their cousins had just attempted and failed the single boldest move in species history. If ancient humans had performance reviews, those early waves would have gotten a very polite, "Let's revisit this next quarter." The group that actually succeeded wasn't even that big. Genetic research estimates that the population responsible for populating literally every human outside Africa today may have numbered only in the thousands, possibly even fewer at certain points, which means somewhere out there, a group smaller than the population of a mid-sized high school became the ancestors of every single person who has ever lived in Europe, Asia, the Americas, and Australia. No pressure. Ancient humans. No pressure at all. But here's where it gets genuinely wild, and also a little bit terrifying if you think about it for too long. Around this same rough window of time, some researchers believe the entire human species may have gone through a population bottleneck so severe it's borderline unbelievable. Geneticist studies analyzing human DNA diversity have suggested that the total worldwide human population may have dropped dramatically low at some point in this era. Small enough that a single bad flu season today could theoretically wipe out more people than existed on the entire planet back then. One theory tries to explain why. Geologist Stanley Ambrose proposed that a massive volcanic eruption, the Toba supervolcano in modern-day Indonesia, may have triggered a period of severe global cooling that devastated food supplies and pushed human populations to the brink. It's a genuinely dramatic idea, though it's worth saying plenty of researchers debate how big of a role Toba actually played, and the science is still very much argued over at conferences that probably get more heated than they should. Either way, something rough was happening to humanity around this time, and our species came startlingly close to just not making it. Imagine being an ancient human during this stretch. You're not thinking, "I am part of a genetic bottleneck event that future scientists will study for millennia." You're thinking, "There is less food than usual and my cousin looks nervous." That's it. That's the whole internal monologue. No dramatic music, just vibes, and increasingly concerning vibes at that. There was no news broadcast telling anyone the entire species was hanging by a thread. No one was tallying the global population and sending out an urgent memo. Ancient humans were simply living day to day, dealing with the practical, immediate problems in front of them, like where the next meal was coming from, completely unaware they were, statistically speaking, one very bad decade away from being a footnote instead of an ancestor. There's something almost funny about that in hindsight. The most dramatic near miss in the entire history of your species happened, and nobody involved had any idea it was dramatic at all. It just felt like Tuesday. A slightly worse than usual Tuesday, sure, but Tuesday nonetheless. And then, against everything working against them, some of these humans decided the move was to leave the continent entirely. Let's talk logistics, because ancient humans did not have logistics. There was no scouting party sent ahead, no planning committee, no spreadsheet estimating how many days of food they'd need. The leading route out of Africa likely followed the coastline near the Red Sea, hugging the shore because coastlines meant a steady, somewhat reliable source of food. This wasn't a bold leap into the unknown so much as a very, very cautious shuffle along a beach, testing every step like someone checking if a lake is frozen enough to walk on. And when I say cautious, I mean glacially slow, which, given the whole Ice Age backdrop, feels appropriate. Researchers estimate this kind of coastal expansion likely crept forward at a pace of maybe a kilometer or two per generation, sometimes less. That means the humans who eventually reached India or Southeast Asia weren't the same people who left the Horn of Africa. They were their great-great-great-grandchildren, inheriting a journey they never personally chose. Born a little farther down a beach their ancestors had been slowly, nervously creeping along for centuries. Nobody woke up one morning and decided, today, we colonize Asia. It was more like humanity's longest, slowest game of the floor is lava, except the lava was literally anywhere unfamiliar, and the stakes were, everything. But eventually, that cautious shuffle turned into something bigger. Populations spread along the coast of Arabia, pushed into South Asia, and kept going. And going. Humans reached Australia by roughly 65,000 years ago, which is genuinely baffling when you consider they had to cross open water to get there. Nobody knows exactly how sophisticated their watercraft were, but somebody, at some point, looked at open ocean with no visible land on the other side and thought, sure, let's find out what's over there. That is either the bravest or most reckless decision in the history of your entire family tree, and you are only here today because it worked. Try to picture the pitch meeting for that one, if ancient humans held pitch meetings. So the plan is, we get on some logs, we paddle toward a horizon with no land visible whatsoever, and we just hope there's something on the other side. No prior successful attempt to point to, no investor deck, no backup plan if the answer turned out to be nothing, just more ocean, forever. And yet, somebody said yes to that plan, got on the logs, and rewrote the map of the entire planet in the process. Modern humans complain about turbulence on a 15-hour flight with snacks, seatback entertainment, and a guaranteed landing strip waiting at the other end. Your ancestors crossed open ocean on faith alone. Here's a fun detail that gets left out of the dramatic documentary version of this story. These early humans weren't traveling alone into an empty world. Other human species were already out there. Neanderthals had been living across Europe and parts of Asia for a very long time before modern humans ever showed up. And when these two groups eventually crossed paths, things got, let's say, complicated. Genetic evidence shows that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred, which means most people with non-African ancestry today are walking around with a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA in their genome right now, whether they asked for it or not. Somewhere in your body is a tiny inherited souvenir from a species that no longer exists, and you probably never even sent a thank you card. Honestly, imagine explaining this to an ancient human. Hey, so tens of thousands of years from now, your descendants are going to spit into a plastic tube, mail it to a company, and find out exactly how much Neanderthal DNA they're carrying around purely for fun on a Tuesday. They would have absolutely no context for that sentence. Meanwhile, you're out here casually inheriting genetic material from an entirely different species of human like it's a hand-me-down sweater from a relative you never met. And mostly just not thinking about it, ever, until right now. So why does any of this matter to you? Scrolling on your phone, comfortably indoors, definitely not migrating across a desert this week. Because every single choice you didn't get to make, every risky decision, every gamble on unfamiliar territory, every moment where a small group of humans could have just stayed put and didn't, stacked up into the exact chain of events required for you to exist. If even one of those early groups had turned back at the coastline, or lost their nerve at the edge of open ocean, or simply had a slightly worse harvest during the wrong decade, none of this happens. Not you, not this video, not the phone you're holding right now. You are the end result of a species that came terrifyingly close to disappearing entirely, decided to leave the only home it had ever known with absolutely no guarantee of survival, and somehow, against genuinely rough odds, made it work. Multiple times, in multiple waves, across generations that never got to see the outcome of their own gamble. So next time, your biggest decision of the day is picking what to watch or agonizing over a text message for 20 minutes, maybe cut yourself some slack. Somewhere back in your family tree, a handful of humans looked at an unmapped desert, a wall of open ocean, and a planet actively trying to erase their entire species, and said, "Hey, let's just go for it." And unbelievably, ridiculously against every reasonable expectation, they were right.